Calypsonian. As a mailman, is to make government understand how the people thinking and all what they saying about all them issues happening, Mr. Manning. People say Trinidad full of money. Millions passing to Jack, John, Jill and me. Jack paying off Bertie, Bertie paying off Harry, and Harry paying Tom to shut his mouth secretly. So the blimp up in the sky, it can't even catch a fly. Who benefiting, Mr. Manning? Look the people them saying, money pass, money pass. TSTT make millions here. Digicel come for their share. Before you say Jack Robinson, Digicel get license. Why? Money pass, money pass. I am just the people's mail. Please don't put Chucky in jail. But Brad Boy's the white boy, they say, kill a black man and get away. Why? Money pass, money pass. I like. Long ago, when Jack get vexed with Jill, with love they will settle the quarrel. They would talk to one another, sit down and consider who right, who wrong in the matter. But today, when a man wants something done, it's only blue notes he depending on. Anything he want under the sun, he paying Jack to pay Charles to pay John. Is who have more corn, feed more fowl in the run. Franklin can a big PNM man. Police charge him for corruption. How the hell he get Jillian Lucky to defend him and she's a UNC? Money pass, money pass. They tell me to take this letter by hand to the police commission. 7 years now we apply for a gun. In 7 days, Manning's son get one. Money pass, money pass. They put a white woman bail at 1.2 million. Somebody reduce it to a few thousand. She's so glad she ran to the USA. Tell Mr. Manning how she get away. Money man. I can't hear you. Money man. Carnival now is a set of money. Millions passing through TSTT. Digicel jump in the brew. They pass some blue notes by phase two and have Booksy and the boys seeing blue, blue. An ex-mailman took a letter to Pandey telling him to make Atto bold and send it right away. When Pandey opened the letter, the postman said he had to ball out like 2 football tickets and a set of money follow. Radio stations of today, Choo Kaiso, they wouldn't play. People asking why them DJ, only fast soca they play. Money pass, money pass. And you know, Mr. Pandey, he and Dukaran they have, they're afraid. They boo Dukaran last Sunday. Why they boo him? Dukaran say, money pass, money pass. Sean Paris kill Mrs. Narayan Singh. The jury find the case appalling. You don't have to go to UE to know that whoever killed she, money pass, money pass, alive. Special verse, special verse. Today, kidnapping and murder surround the almighty dollar. And because of money, vice and violence, killing we in the drug houses and in URP. Because of money, innocent blood is being spilled. Because of money, court witnesses have been killed. So as a mailman, literally, I'm using this medium for you to see. Trinidad's problem is that we have too much money. Trinidad going to Germany. And you know, FIFA, welcome we. But the Committee for Ethics say they don't like how we sell tickets. Money pass, money pass. Peter Ben shall say he stopped playing mass as man. Suddenly he changed his stand. With Catholic prayers he never took part. Now he's holier than the Sacred Heart. Why? Money pass. 500,000. Money pass. This the last year for this grandstand. In breaking down, government have a new plan. It don't break down yet, but you build it back. You know somebody don't get the contract. Money pass. Money pass. Look, money. Look, did you start giving money? The Pandey give you money to us. Peter Ben shall say he stopped playing mass as man. Suddenly he changed his stand. With Catholic prayers he never took part. Now he's holier than the Sacred Heart. Why? Money pass. 500,000. Money pass. This the last year for this grandstand. In breaking down, government have a new plan. It don't break down yet, but you build it back. You know somebody don't get the contract. Money pass. Money pass. This the last year for this grandstand. In breaking down, government have a new plan. It don't break down yet, but we build it back. You know somebody don't get the contract. Money pass. Money pass. Now we holier than the Sacred Heart. Why? Money pass. 500,000. Money pass. This the last year for this grandstand. In breaking down, government have a new plan. It don't break down yet, but we build it back. You know somebody don't get the contract. Money pass. Money pass. Look, money. Look, did you start giving money? The plan they give you money to us. Plan they give you money. Did you start giving money?
Oh, yes, the greatest music, the greatest musical genre that God has blessed us with. Kaiso, money pass. Good evening to you all and welcome to Politics 101. The mighty chalk dust, money pass. They're breaking down the stand to build a new one. It ain't break down yet, but they don't start building a new one. Somebody get the contract. Money pass. That is why I love Kaiso, and that is why I want you all to love Kaiso, because it tells stories, and the stories are timeless, and they're also, if we may invent the word, placeless. Chalk Dust is singing about Trinidad in the 90s, but it smelled like Guyana in 2025. Placeless, timeless. Money passing in Guyana. And some people getting tied up. Because they're calling it development. Development as Trinidad. Development, ask all the petrol states. Good evening to all of you. Welcome to Politics 101. Sister Anova from Diamond Grove, and all of you from Diamond Grove. Good evening and welcome. Welcome to all of you from Mocha, Arcadia, Mocha, Arcadia, Mocha, Arcadia, same thing. Welcome to Politics 101. How about all you wonderful people there from Peters Hall? Those of you from Peters Hall. Good evening. Good evening to all of you from the East Bank of Demerara. I pray, always pray for these banks. You see, when you come off the plane and you're driving into town, you got to drive down the East Bank Road. And we can get the East Bank Road right. Just as we can get blackout out of our existence. We can get electricity right. We can get the main road that welcoming people when they come to beautiful Guyana. We can get that right. And if you're saying that you don't want to come through Timeri or Cherry Dragon and you want to go to Ogo, check the road. Check the road coming out from Ogo. Lad. Cow pasture. Cow pasture. Good evening to you, Brother Vibert from Grove, East Bank, Demerara. Good evening to all of you who are joining us this evening. All my friends and family from Providence, good evening to you. Good evening to all of you. My brother Ernest Elliott from Golden Grove, Nabaklis, Haslington. Good evening to you, my brother. Ernest Elliott, former member of Parliament, as he is contributing and has paved the way for those of us who came behind. And the wonderful people of Golden Grove, Nabaklis, Haslington, let us say Bucklish, wonderful friends and wonderful people. They refer to that area as the karaoke capital of Guyana. They have karaoke there almost every night. Good evening to you all and welcome. In the early days when karaoke had first come to Guyana, I remember going to Haslington, the Peterkins place there. The original karaoke place. Sister Robin has her school there now. The family and the matriarch of the family just died a couple of weeks ago. We mourned with the family. Good evening to all of you from Haslington, Golden Grove, Nabaklis. I know many of you are on this program, and I am so grateful. We are so grateful for your presence. Money pass. Money pass. A lot of money passing in Guyana. Everything is money now, you know. Money pass. Good evening to all of you who are joining us from North America, Brooklyn. I know we are snowing out there in that part of the world. Queens, the Bronx, upstate, downstate, New Jersey. Welcome to Politics 101. Welcome to Politics 101. You know, when we talk about that area there, Golden Grove, Nabaklis, Haslington, there's also Enmore, you know, North Enmore. I only learned that a few years ago. I think it was the 2011 election. I did work in that area, and they are some staunch APNU supporters there. And I always knew that Black people live in that part, that northern part of Enmore, next to Haslington. But I didn't know the history of the place until a few years ago. So you have North Enmore, Haslington, Golden Grove, Nabaklis. And it got a history because I was part of a team that did some interviews with people who were displaced from Enmore itself. People were pushed out there during the disturbances of the 1960s and they had to flee. A lot of Black families had to flee Enmore and they end up settling on the northern part, Haslington, North and Moore. And one of the persons we interviewed was the very lady that I mentioned a couple of moments ago, Sister Robin Simon's mother. Morna Peterkin was also a sister who served as a member of parliament. And Ernest is connected to that family. North and Moore, people had to flee. And I remember interviewing Mrs. Peterkin, and because she was one of the persons that was displaced, and the horror stories. People were displaced all over, because one of the things about the disturbance is that if you're Indian and you live in a majority Black village, you had to flee to an Indian area. And if you're in an Indian area, majority Indian area, and you're African, you had to flee. My neighbors, for example, house next door to where I was born, Rosie, they were Indian people. I remember well, I was a child, but there are some memories stay with you. And those people had to flee Buxton. In fact, what they did was I think they exchanged their home with an African family from Annandale. The Jones came and they lived there. Those of us who know anything about Buxton folklore, Daddy Jones and Simon, but Daddy was more known. We used to call him the human sand truck. That's a man, he fetch load for a living. You buy your bag rice and your bag flour, you on rent and kick yard and truck and so on. Daddy fetch, we used to call it the human sand truck. You get 2 bag rice, 1 bag flour on the head. And then you stop. By give me one light there. Say, Daddy, but that thing on you, no, this is not nothing. This is not nothing. Give me one light there, Daddy. Then you want the light. You get the load on the head. Them chap is strong. Daddy Jones. But that family came to Buxton because an Indian family next door to me had to get out of Buxton, and Daddy and them had to get out from the Indian area, and they came to Buxton. So I understand what that displacement means. Daddy Jones was something else. Car run over your foot. Them by say, now car and run over Daddy foot. The wheel, can I carry for the wheel? And he come home and he said, David never call me David. David, come by, come, put little water on this foot for me. I said, what happened, Daddy? He said, can I run over wheel by? Strong chap. And those people gave our communities the character that they have now. Everybody a drive car now. Everybody a drive car now. But the stories of the 1960s are not one-sided story. When you listen to some of our Indian comrades, they talk the story as though it's a one-sided story. They talk about people in Linden, what they call the Linden Massacre. All people were massacred in Linden, and Indian people were chased out of Linden. And it is true. What they don't do is talk about the son Chapman, where Black people died in a launch. And all the evidence point that it was the work of PPP supporters. But we talk these one-sided stories. The 1960s were horrible for both communities. When I got into politics as a little boy in Buxton, and we The WPA was born as a quote-unquote multiracial party and multiracial movement. A lot of our supporters in Buxton, big people, they pulled me aside. David, you're a little by. But you have to understand what went on. And they would tell me stories of the 1960s. The vivid stories of African males whose penises were cut off and put in their mouth. The story was not a one-sided story. Our Indian comrades have a lot of horrible stories to tell about what they went through. And some of us don't realize that African people went through some of the same things, sometimes even worse. And that is why we don't want to get back to the 1960s. We do not want to get back to the situation of racial violence. It's the worst kind of violence. Violence that is driven by ethnicity. We have walked that road, and we don't want to walk that road again. Both communities suffered tremendously. Brother U.C. Guyana has argued in one of his books that both sides were aggressors. That in 1961, the Indian community were the aggressors. And as the theater moved from the urban areas, the rural areas, the urban areas in 62 and 63, African community were the aggressors. And then in 64, the Indian community were the aggressors. And Guyanas argued that there's no guilty race, since both races were engaged in atrocities against each other. Some of the comrades like Ravi Dev don't want to admit that the disturbance started in 61. And the first instances were aggression against Africans, Felix Ross on the quarantine, and then on the west coast of Demerara. And a lot of that was ignited after the Triumphalist March by the PPP after the 61 election. The PPP had a big march starting from the quarantine and the east and coming from the west, passing through the villages. And in the wake of those marches, we had the violence started. It doesn't matter now for us to argue who started and who started. It's that all were involved and all were consumed. And that is why we don't want to go back there. And the PPP is trying to push us there because they were able to use the instance of ethnic violence in the 60s to poison the minds of their supporters and to make them believe that the violence of the 1960s was a black thing. No. In my village, the pharmacists, the dispensers, they call it in those days, Chandaban, Indian family, they did not leave. They were protected. by the African people in the community Buxton. Said, this is me dispenser. You're chasing you out. The Ruption family, Indian family. The Ruption, they were the goldsmith. They didn't leave. They stayed. They were protected by the African community in Buxton. And there were other Indian families that remained. A lot of them left, but some remained. And so the story of the 1960s is it's a complex story. A complex story. The big lesson from that story is that we don't want to go back there. We have managed since then to dodge the bullet. There have been instances of ethnic violence since then, not on the same scale as the 1960s. But we have had instances. And they've all come around election time. I remember in 1973, following my auntie out to the road to catch car to go down to town to sell early morning. And there was an Indian man on the public road in Buxton dead. There, I remember that well, 1973 election. And we later found out that that man was killed outside of Buxton, and his body was brought and dumped in Buxton to make it look like the Buxtonians killed an Indian man. We have had skirmishes since then, but we have dodged the bullet. Ethnic violence is usually driven by three major things. When a community feels that it is being robbed of possessions, dispossessed of land, for example. That is perhaps the major cause of ethnic violence. And we see the land grabbing that is going on in Guyana, first of all on the part of the government, which is saying that it is taking land to develop the country. And then private people are taking away ancestral lands from communities. And the government is enabling it. We are saying one of the major causes of ethnic conflict is dispossession of resources such as land. And they're doing it in Guyana without any regard for the consequences. A second cause of ethnic conflict is the sense of disenfranchisement. When you vote, when people believe their vote don't count. The Indian Guyanese community has complained about that, And today, the African Guyanese community is complaining about it. Dispossession, disenfranchisement. My sister Lynette is saying here, and she will know good what I'm talking about. The Indians from Annandale tried to kill my brother. If it were not for the Buxtonians, my brother would be dead. There are stories. And that Annandale area, because African people live in Annandale South, Indian people live in Annandale North. And they have a lot of stories to tell. The point I am making here tonight is that ethnic conflict is not a one-way thing. That both communities suffered tremendously. And we don't want to go back there. And we are pleading with this government. Be very careful about what you're doing because you're fanning the flames of ethnic violence. We are into election year. And GCOM has not fixed the question of the voters list. You're playing with trouble. Just as Indian people felt frustrated between 1968 and 1992 because they argued that their votes were not counted. African people from 1992 to the present, they're arguing the same thing. And 2020 told a story that the PPP and some of our Indian comrades don't want to hear. They block it out. And that is the charge of electoral malpractice is not a one-way charge either. The PPP argued during the PNC time that the PNC engaged in multiple voting on election day. And some of it was documented. What the 2020 election showed us is that there is another kind of electoral malpractice, and that is the malpractice before election day. What happened is that the PNC outrigged the PPP between 68 and 92. The PPP used to rig during that time. They would rig before election day. They didn't master the art of rigging on election day. But what we saw in 2020 is that the PPP mastered the art of rigging before election day and on election day itself. The thing about the 2020 rigging with the PPP is that the PPP got covered. It got cover from the international community. The international community went to great lengths to expose what they saw as rigging on after election day. That is the Ashman story, after election day. What they did, is that they did not shine the light on rigging before election day. But in the strangest twist that you're ever going to experience in politics, the recount which to my mind, was unconstitutional. To a lot of people, the recount was unconstitutional because the law is clear. If you have complaints about an election, you take it to an elections petition. What happened in 2020 is that the complaints were taken to the court. And instead of the court tossing it to an election petition, the court said to GCOM, you can fix the complaints. And GCOM decided to fix the complaints with a recount. Unconstitutional, to my mind. But when they went to the recount and they opened the boxes, my goodness, the PPP rigging fly out. And so although the recount was unconstitutional, the recount was able to expose the enormous rigging machinery before election day and the coordination between what happened on before election day and election day itself. And the international community covered down and may have pressured GCOM to cover down what came out of the boxes. And that is why up to today, my position, the position of our party, is that we do not know who won the 2020 election. We can't. We don't know what were valid votes and what were invalid votes. And that is what the chief elections officer, Mr. Lowenfield, was arguing, correctly so. Said, I cannot regularize 48 boxes that don't have statutory documents. What am I counting these votes against? When the police tells me that there were hundreds of people from a small sample, they were able to say there were hundreds of people who were not in the country on election day but voted. I can't validate an election given all of that. And Lowenfield was right. But GCOM ignored him, and under tremendous pressure from local and international forces, they called the election for the PPP. Because they were up against a constitutional problem. And that is that when an election is in doubt, it's settled at a petition. But those rules were tossed aside in 2020, and they opened the boxes. And the Constitution does not allow for that. They read the electoral laws in a particular way. To my mind, it's inconsistent with the Constitution. But they backed themselves up against a constitutional law, just as in the United States in the 2000 election, where America would have ended up with a Republican president and a Democratic vice president. The Constitution did not allow for that. And so the Supreme Court shut down the whole thing and awarded the election to George Bush and the Republicans. And it was the same thing in 2020 in Guyana. People talk about 5 months, as if the coalition caused the delay of the 5 months. The 5 months delay was started by the PPP, which said they saw irregularities and they went to the court. They didn't say, all right, we see the irregularity, but we're going to wait for petition. They are the ones that initiated the 5 months. And the court obliged them. And GCOM obliged them. And so we spent 5 months opening the boxes, counting the votes in the boxes. It got to take 5 months. Who initiated that? The PPP. Who obliged GCOM? So when people running around and talking about 5 months, rigging in 5 months, no, the rigging happened long before the 5 months. The 5 months delay was a consequence of the riggers being caught when they did not expect to be caught. You see, when the PPP run around and talking about statements of poll, it is because their statements of poll reflect the rigged vote in the boxes. But when you went into the boxes, what you found in the boxes were not consistent with the PPP statement of poll. And that is why the election was not decided on statements of poll. It was decided on the raw votes in the boxes. And those raw votes in the boxes, many of them were invalid votes because they represented a breach of the law. GCOM lawyer says, if you don't have statutory documents accompanying the boxes, it's a breach of the law. Madam Chairman said, if people did not enter the country on election day or before, but were found to have voted, it's a breach of the law. And this happened. GCOM is admitting there were breaches of the law. So, sisters and brothers, GCOM has not fixed that. It does not fix the voters list. Because what a bloated voters list does is that it increases the pool of vote from which you can steal. If the voters list is the number of voters in a country is 400,000, but you have a list with 410,000. So you have a bloated list with about 10,000. So you have about 10,000 extra votes there on the voters list that could be used to manipulate the election. In Guyana case, at the last election, you had over 200,000 extra votes. And as we speak, it's about 300,000 now. So you have a pool of 200,000 votes, which is half the actual electorate from which to steal. And the PPP is saying, stay with that voters list, which means they intend to steal. The opposition is saying, get rid of that voters list, which means the opposition has no intention of stealing from a bloated list. So we have to put these things in context. The PPP has shown their intention to steal by not getting rid of the opportunities to steal. And one opportunity to steal is the extra names that are on the list. And the country is not in uproar over it. Why? Not because half of the country doesn't believe that they're about to steal the elections and the voters list. Half of the country believes that. But the powers that be, the international community, the local civil society, one of the parties that represents half of the nation, they all don't see it as a big deal. You see, when people observe elections around the world, they don't set a maximum bar, they set a minimum bar. They will look, they will see Stephen, and they would say, yes, there is Stephen, but this Stephen would not overturn the results, and they certify a thief in election. That's what they do around the world. They certify thief in election because they come to the conclusion that even if you were to take into consideration the thieving, it would not change the results. Jimmy Carter is being buried as we speak. The long ceremony starting in Georgia, but he's in this capital. God bless Jimmy Carter. I think he was a wonderful human being, wonderful president. But Jimmy Carter in 1992 certified the election based on what he called a quick count. They did a sample count, and he determined from the sample count that the PPP had won, and the country was on the brink of explosion. And he thought the best thing to do was to do a quick count, award the election to one side. He called the White House, we are now learning, and apprised the White House that the country is about to explode. And whatever the White House told Desmond Hoyt, Hoyt threw in the towel. Fast forward to 2020, same story. Jimmy Carter is gone because he left in 2004, sorry. 2004, yes. He left in 2004. Basically saying, I come here to get rid of a dictatorship. But in effect, what I have contributed to doing is creating another dictatorship. He washed his hands. In 2024, there were other players, other American and European and CARICOM players. And they all knew that the election was rigged up. And they all knew that Guyana was facing explosion. And they did the same thing. They appealed to the White House. In this case, the Secretary of State got involved. And whatever they told Mr. Granger or threatened him, he threw the towel in. So those PPP members who were running around the place and calling other people riggers, Just as the international community suppressed and gave cover to the rigging between 68 and 92, the same international community has given cover to the rigging from 92 to the present. And there's a lesson here to be learned by both sides. And that lesson is that if you can't settle your own problem, other people will come in and settle it for you. And so the 2020 election was settled in favor of the PPP. And that is why the Americans said the government was installed and not elected. Because who knows better than that community? International community looks after its own interest. And the international community has an interest in stability, political stability in Guyana. But in the process of creating stability, a fake stability, you end up creating the conditions for instability. So we have a situation where African people are feeling dispossessed, land and other resources. They're feeling disenfranchised because GCOM and the powers that be, including the party of our East Indian comrades, are colluding to dispossess Africans, to make their votes not count at the coming election. And then the third element is when a group feels dishonored. And the way in which Black people are being dishonored in Guyana is, it makes you weep. I don't have to go through the long tales, but just look at the cash transfer, the cash grant, the 100,000 cash grant. Look at the story around it. It should have been a story of people getting a little small piece. But instead, it's a story of shame, horrors, cheating. Is when which this government got people climbing upon one another and, shame. The government has still not justified why it made people register for this cash grant. To create a database for the cash grant, you had so many other databases. GRA get a database. The Ministry of Finance, I'm sure, has a database. NIS get database. Come on. So you have to register to get this cash grant. But yet, when you go to Bartica and they start calling out the names them in Bartica, it's dead people name they're calling out. And then when it was drawn to their attention that is Black people, dead people name are you calling out, they stop calling out name. The question here is, how did those dead people register for the cash grant? Because it's clear, dead people register for the cash grant. You said you are registering people. to create this database. And yet this database that you've created get dead people on it. As the people in Bartica. How did the dead people get onto the database for this cash grant? Where people have to register. Dead people come out from the grave and register. Sisters and brothers, you know, they get onto that database, that cash grant, the same way they get onto the voters list. This cash grant had nothing to do with people getting a little money. It all has to do with the upcoming election. And it's not about trying to buy votes, because I don't think the government is going to buy anybody with $100,000. There may be a couple of people who are stupidity in that sense, but I don't think the government intends to buy votes with the cash grant. They use the cash grant in order to create another mechanism for electoral stealing. And I stand by that. In any other country, dead people appearing on the database for cash grant that was done through registration the other day, it would have been licking down the headlines of the newspapers and the news entities. I think in many regards, the media in Guyana have become normalized. In another country, that would have been the headline for weeks. So the way in which African people have been feeling dishonored, it goes beyond the pale. I happen to be one of those persons who have to fetch that cross, in that some of us have identified with the feeling of Black dispossession, disenfranchisement, and dishonor. And we've identified with standing up and pushing back against it. And so we are more aware of the toll that that thing is taking on the Black community. I am not surprised that our Indian comrades do not feel the pain of their African comrades. It's not something that happens easily. But for somebody like me, who cut my teeth on the politics of multiracialism, I spent the better part of my youth trying to convince Black people to feel the pain of Indian people. That's how I cut my teeth in politics. And in many regards, we were successful in doing that. There are people my age in my village to this day. They don't use the C word to describe Indians in front of me. To this day in Buxton. So, no. You say Indo-Guyanese. Yeah. Since we socialize Black people to feel the pain of their Indian comrades. And I'm so hurt that our Indian comrades, led by their leaders, their political, social, and religious leaders, they don't feel the pain of Black people. They don't. They're not socialized though. I think at a base level, the ordinary Indian sister, Indian brother, feel it. You're a human being. And when you look across and you see your sisters and brothers in pain, you know it. You know it. But they're doing nothing about it. And the reason they're doing nothing about it is because their leaders are not socializing them to do anything about it. It makes it more imperative for Black leaders to wrap their arms around Black people. And people like myself have decided to identify with that. It comes with a price. I'm being called racist. A lot of Indian people don't like me. All I'm doing is saying that there was once upon a time, I helped to socialize Black people to feel the pain of Indian people. And today, my comrades on the other side are not socializing Indian people to feel the pain of African people. And so the burden is twofold, threefold, tenfold on people like myself to stand with Black people. I am ringing the bell, and we in the Working People's Alliance, starting with a press conference on Monday, to warn Guyana that the road we're going down is not going to end well. If we are forced to go to an election with that messed up voters list, without biometrics, and with a clearly partisan and biased GCOM, we are staring down trouble. In all my studies, I've had the opportunity to study ethnic societies. I've taught for decades on ethnicity. All my studies. When I look at Guyana, I don't see anything nice. Human beings. A lot of our political activists, under their breath, they curse Black people. Because they say Black people taking stupidness, and they shouldn't take stupidness. And there is a validity to that criticism. But I think that criticism avoids the systemic nature of people's behavior, political behavior. That people's political behavior is not driven by individuals. It's often driven by the collective. That if we were a society where the police and the army were neutral, if we were a society in which the courts and other institutions were cognizant and were prepared to act on the injustices in the society, Black people attitude to this government in terms of resistance and protest would have been different. But even as I say that, after a time, people burst out of that bubble. And we saw it. We saw what they call the troubles 2 decades ago, where young Black men in response to the extrajudicial killings, took matters into their own hands. And the support they got from ordinary Black people was amazing. We are walking down that road again, because there are going to be pockets of Black people who are going to say, forget the political parties, forget David Hines, forget Aubrey Norton, forget all of y'all. We are going to take matters in our hands. The PPP knows that. But I think they feel that they got enough Black people's stupidity, bastardy, that Black people are not going to worry with any resistance. They actually feel that. They've done what they call a sociological analysis of Black people. Our memories are short. Give a little rum, some women, and some money, and we're going to forget about our rights. They've made an analysis of us. And they've come to conclusions about how we would act. They feel that there's no in-between with Black people. To them, it's either Black people behave stupid and ignorant, or they behave in a compliant way. And they feel they've worked on us enough that we're going to behave in a compliant way. They're wrong. They're wrong. Ultimately, people are not going to continue to live in that state in Guyana. We are not going to be able to survive another 5 years of the PPP. I do not think so. We barely got away with it after 2020. We barely. As I said, it took a lot of manipulation by the external communities. I don't think that we'll survive it this time. And the ball is in the court, firstly, of the PPP, to begin to open up possibilities for a free and fair election. It's in their court. They can do it if they want to. The ball is also in the court of the international community, not to make the mistake they made in 2020. Because all they did is to kick the ball down the road. And thirdly, the ball is in the court of opposition leaders. We can decide to play politics and not pay attention to the root causes of the political dysfunction in our country. And finally, the ball is in Black people court. We can decide that we want to live like the proverbial slave, or we want to live as free people. So it's a combination. The PPP and its supporters, the international community, the opposition leadership, and Black people. Together, we can stop this train wreck. Or together, we can book our date with the tragedy that is bound to ensue if we don't get this election right. Often it is the bearer of these bad news that get slammed. Oh, David Hines is sitting up there encouraging violence, encouraging Black people to behave bad. That is what they're going to say. I don't give a damn. I've been through too much. I don't care anymore. I cannot sit here, given my knowledge of Guyana, given my knowledge of ethnically divided societies, and look you all in the eye and tell you all is well and all is going to be well. No. I'd be lying, and you all should lynch me for lying. All is not well. And all is not going to be well. And the PPP must not believe that they got all of us cornered. The biggest nightmare of the PPP and its supporters, not the ones on the ground, their handlers, is a free and fair election in which a joint opposition confronts the PPP. They're working overtime for us not to go into the election as a joint opposition. They're working overtime for us to drop biometrics, drop the voters list story. Their best day is going to be when the opposition says we're going into an election with the dirty voters list, without biometrics, and with the same chairman of GCOM. And we are going in as individual parties. Again, they're beating up on me. David Hines and the WPA pushing for a coalition, on an opposition coalition. And Norton should not pay us no mind. And Nigel Hughes should not pay us no mind. And perhaps there are elements in those two parties who are not paying us any mind. They are flirting with danger too. We have a straw poll, and it's a straw poll. Not too many people have responded to it. I think it's about 100 people respond. But we kind of give people an option. You can support, whether you support PNC, PPP, WPA, AFC, or you support a PNC, AFC, WPA coalition. And you know who are the winners? The majority of people favor the PNC, AFC, WPA coalition. The coalition option is beating Nigel Hughes, AFC, beating Aubrey Norton, PNC, beating David Hines, WPA, beating Orphan Ali, PPP. I wish more of you can, find that straw poll and give your view on which option you think is the best option. It can be found on Politics 101 Facebook page. It can be found on Camps TV Facebook page, my own personal Facebook page. We're not able to get it on YouTube, but you can go to those pages and engage it. If we don't get this election right, Guyana is doomed. And Guyana will not be doomed, which means we'll have to get this election right. The PPP, the international community, the opposition parties and their leaders, and Black people. We cannot surrender to the dooms. And we will not surrender to the dooms, because there's some of us who will fight tooth and nail. You see, sometimes in politics, you have to be straightforward. WPA said on Monday that realistically, we cannot win an election. Political parties don't normally say that. But we are being realistic with you. On our own, we can't win an election. But those people who look to us for leadership, who on a normal playing field would give us their votes, we intend to make your vote count for something. And the primary way of making your vote count for something is if we link up with like-minded parties in a coalition, give us the best chance of winning. So your vote to a WPA, which cannot win on its own, your vote will now be linked with votes from other parties in the opposition to give us the best chance of winning. It's not novel politics. It's what we call honest politics. If you give us our votes, your votes, on our own, realistically, we can't win. But when we take your votes and we link it up with the votes of the PNC and the AFC and other like-minded opposition parties, we'll cut the PPP's ass. But we're not going to cut their ass in a rigged election. We're going to cut their ass in a free and fair election, which means we have to get free and fair elections, and we have to get a joint opposition coalition to cut the PPP's ass. Sometimes you have to show leadership. And, you know, I don't expect the PNC to say it can't win an election on its own. The PNC can win an election on its own. So I don't expect them to say they can't win, since they stand a better chance of winning on their own of all the opposition parties. I can't speak for the AFC. Maybe the AFC think it can win on its own. I am not sure that that's their position. I think their position, or the position of some people in the AFC, is that they can create a minority government. Well, what the hell is that? You create a minority government with the PPP, still the government? Oh, what? What are you doing? What are you doing, What are you doing? What was that? What's that? What's that? Okay, the thing, And we're going to hold the balance in what? There's no balance. When you talk about balance, you're talking about two sides that are willing to balance. That thing about this minority party where you hold the balance, talk to me. Didn't we have it in 2011? Ramatar and the PPP sit down there from 2011 to 2015. Nothing changed. Nothing changed. It was a minority government. Nothing changed. The PPP was still the government. Ramatar was the president. For the minority thing to make sense, you have to have both sides that are willing to work together. The PPP has said it is not willing to work together with anybody. So this whole notion of a minority government, I don't know what it is. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. We got to beat the PPP, get into office, and then use office to change the political culture, to change the political machinery, to change the rules of governance, to ensure that whether the PPP or PNC or whoever win in the future, they do not govern the country like their own. But we got to get power to make those changes. We're not going to make those changes in the opposition. And I want to say one last thing. Remember, the oil money, we have said that as we speak here now, we have made enough from oil that each household can get $1 million Guyana dollars, each household. You want $100,000? We're going to lick down Matty for $100,000 per voter. You have a family of 6, mama, daddy, and a big picnic. And now you get $100,000 each, $300,000 in a family of 6. Or mama, daddy, and 5 picnic, 7, 2, get $100,000, $200,000. Or that same household of 5 or 6 getting $1 million. Where mommy and daddy can move out of the rent house, can take the $1 million and invest it in a house lot. Or if you get a house lot already, build a house, invest it in putting down upon a house. $1 million. Guaranteed by law every year. Because you can depend on $1 million next year. Okay, it's in the law. By your policies, you shall tell me who you are and where you stand. Chinese people, the choice cannot be starker. There are people who are ready to steal the coming elections, and there are those of us who are ready to ensure that elections are not stolen and that we get a government that will stand by our people, all of our people. Thank you all so much. It's always a pleasure to do this. A lot is happening at GCOM. A lot is happening at GCOM. I'm going to try to get Vincent Alexander here tomorrow night to bring us up to date in the startling developments at GCOM. The struggle goes on. The struggle goes on. And we're going to confront this struggle and continue to confront this struggle. Because it's only when we win this little struggle that we can get rid of the big trouble that is coming ahead. Thank you all so much. Those of you who have contributed to our program, Sister Natalie, thank you again, Sister Natalie. Brother Musai, thank you very much for your contribution. Brother Claude, thank you very much for your contribution. We're going to continue this struggle. Together, we're going to win. It's going to be long and hard, but that's what struggle is about. Tomorrow night, we come back to continue. To continue walking the road